How to play fingerstyle or finger-picking guitar. Book 2, Lesson 1A. How to play Romanza or Romance by Bartolomé Calatayud. Before we get started on this lesson, I'd just like to point out that this lesson was recently inserted into the course, hence the number 1A. So if the PDF you've got doesn't have the tablature for this lesson in it, just go back to www.ebooks4guitar.com and re-download the PDF using your original name and email address. And the new PDF has obviously got those updates in. And it's worth remembering this in the future, because by the time I've finished all the videos for Book 2, there's bound to be a number of modifications to the PDF. If you're new to this channel, this lesson is part of a complete professionally written progressive fingerstyle guitar course that so far consists of 2 books. I'll put a link to a playlist of all the lessons in order for Book 1 and Book 2 down below in the description. And if you'd like to get hold of the PDF that contains all the tablature for all the lessons in both Book 1 and Book 2 completely free, then you can get it at the same website I mentioned earlier, www.ebooks4guitar.com. Before I teach you how to play this tune, let's just listen to it being played 3 times with slight changes, and I want to see if you can recognise what the differences are between the 3 versions. Here we go then. Of the three interpretations, the most obviously different one is version 3, which is played without a metronome, and it starts slightly faster. However, it speeds up and slows down because it's open time, so you can interpret the speed to create emotional response. The first two interpretations both have a metronome beat in the background that's the same speed, and they're both 3/4 time. However, you'll notice with one version I allow the bass notes to ring, and in the other version I mute the bass notes after I've played them. Let's hear the first few bars of version 1 and 2 again, but listen carefully to the bass notes. Hopefully you could hear that in the first version I muted the bass note between each bar, and in the second version I allowed the bass note to ring on. Now, the reason I decided to draw your attention to these different interpretations of the same tune is because when I did my research on this tune just to see how everyone else played it, I noticed everyone interpreted it differently, and the most common interpretation was actually the wrong interpretation. Though, personally, I don't actually think that matters. But if I was a hardcore classical teacher, I would be very strict about this. Right, let's take a look at the score so I can explain how it should be interpreted. And looking at the music, you'll notice that the bass notes are all crotchets, which last for one beat. And in the first beat of each bar, where the bass note would be, there's a rest. Now, where there's a rest, there should be silence. And what this means is, when you pass from one bar to another, you should mute the bass note so that it isn't ringing at the same time you're playing the melody. So the correct interpretation was the first interpretation, which sounded like this. Now, whilst it is a correct interpretation of this tune to mute the bass, I'll leave it down to you to decide whether you want to mute the bass or not. And that's because, as I said earlier, during my research I found many good guitarists who didn't mute the bass, so they obviously did it as a choice of taste. However, at the end of this video, I'll explain the different techniques to mute the bass in case you want to try it yourself. And as this video's for everyone, if you're a little more advanced or if you've been playing for a bit longer, it's well worth practicing it with the muted bass as well, because it's a good technique to try and perfect. Let's start by doing an overview of the whole tune. This tune is 3/4 time, which means there's 3 crotchet beats per bar, and it's allegretto moderato, which means moderately fast. And there's 2 main themes, both of which are repeated. So you repeat the first page and then you repeat the second page. And the reason I've inserted this tune at the beginning of book 2 is because it's fairly easy and there's no really hard chords to play. So everyone should be able to play this with a little bit of practice. Regarding the fingerpicking, throughout most of the tune, you play the melody part, which is the double stops, with the index and middle finger, and you play the bass part with the primary finger or the thumb. Right, let's start learning how to play the tune, starting with line 1. To play this first line, you only need to use the first and second finger on the fretting hand, and it's the same finger picking pattern for all 3 bars. So just looking at the melody and the fingering hand, you play the first and second finger in the 3rd and 4th frets. Then you slide the shape down to the 1st fret and then remove your fingers. This is what that looks and sounds like. Then we add the bass line and the finger picking pattern of index middle together and primary primary for all 3 bars, and it sounds like this. Here that is again at a nice slow 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction, in case you want to try and play along. And here that is again one last time at 100 beats per minute. And here that is one last time, but faster at 120 beats per minute. Looking at bar 4, this is just a bass line, which can be played as a partial G, and you just use the primary finger or thumb to play the 3 notes. Here that is again with a 2-bar introduction, so you can try and play along with it. Bar 4 is fairly easy, so we can join that on to the first 3 bars straight away. So now we can try playing the first 4 bars at 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. Let's try that again slowly before we speed it up a little bit. Now here's the first 4 bars with a 2-bar introduction at 120 beats per minute. Let's try that again at the same speed. Once you've got the finger picking for these first 4 bars, you've more or less got the finger picking for the entire tune. Right, let's move on to the next 2 bars, bars 5 and 6. And looking at bar 5, you'll notice that the fingering pattern is slightly different, where we play the 3rd fret with the 1st finger and the 5th fret with the 3rd finger. And there's basically 2 fingering patterns for the fretting hand throughout this whole tune. The first one being where the 1st and the 2nd fingers are next to each other, and the second one being where the 1st and 3rd fingers have a fret space between them. In this tune, These fingering patterns can occur on any fret or any string, but where they do occur, use the same fingering. Here's what bar 5 and 6 look and sound like. And here that is again at the same speed with a 2-bar introduction, so you can try and play along if you think you're ready. Right, we'll join that together with the next 2 bars straight away, so it makes sense as a phrase and you can learn it as a phrase. But before we do, we need to learn bars 7 and 8 because they're a little different to everything else in the tune. And you can see above bar 7 is written G half bar, but don't let this worry you because we're not playing any kind of bar chord. All you have to do to play this is play the first finger on the 3rd fret, the second finger on the 4th fret, and the 3rd finger on the 5th fret. So there's no bar involved. And we maintain this shape for both bars 7 and 8. This is what bar 7 and 8 look and sound like. If you think you're ready, let's try bar 7 and 8 with a 2-bar introduction. And here that is again at the same speed. Right, let's bring that phrase together. So we're playing bars 5, 6, 7 and 8. And here that is again with a 2-bar introduction. Now here that is again more quickly at 120 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. And here that is again with a 2-bar introduction in case you want to try playing along. Now, with all of these lessons, I recognise you're taking in an awful lot in a very short video. So don't worry if you have to pause the lesson and go away and practice, or return another day. That's all perfectly good and normal. So where you need to, just pause the video or stop it and practice a little and come back later. We've now reached exactly halfway through the first page. So we'll do from this point right the way to the end of the first page, so it makes more sense. Looking at this section, you'll notice the double stops are all on the same 2 strings. However, the bass notes change. And there's a couple of walking bass lines towards the end of this section. We'll do the next 5 bars up to the beginning of where you have the walking bass line, so I can explain that in more detail. Here that is being played, so you can hear how it should sound. Notice that we use the same fingering shapes we used earlier, but we're moving around a lot more on the neck, which might take a bit of practice. Here that is again being played at the same speed with a 2-bar introduction. Try and play along if you think you're ready. If you think you're ready, let's try playing that again a little bit faster at 120 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. And here that is again, one last time at 120 beats per minute. Right, let's take a look at the last 3 bars of the first page. Looking at the first bar of those last 3 bars, bar 14, you'll notice we're playing the same fingering shape as we did earlier, with the first finger on the 3rd fret and the 3rd finger on the 5th fret. And this leaves your 2nd finger free to play the 2nd note in the walking bass line, which is the 4th fret on the A string. Here's just that bar being played. And here that is again, one more time. Looking at the last 2 bars of page 1, the best way to play these is using a D-shaped chord. And you can either do this using a conventional open D chord and then use the 4th finger for the walking bass line, or you can use a partial bar chord and use the 3rd finger for the walking bass line. You might want to try both these methods before deciding on one. Here's those 2 bars being played using the regular open chord and the 4th finger for the bass line. And here that is again, using the partial bar chord and the 3rd finger for the walking bass line. Here that is again, with a 2-bar introduction. Try playing along with whichever method you prefer. Let's bring the last 3 bars together so you can see and hear how the walking bass line should be played. Here that is one last time with a 2-bar introduction in case you want to try and play along. Let's try that second half from the 9th bar to the end. And here that is again with a 2-bar introduction in case you want to try and play along. And here that is again, one last time at the same speed, so you can try and play along. Right, here's the whole of the first section brought together at 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. Try and play along if you think you're ready. And here that is again, one last time at the same speed. Right, let's take a look at the second page, which very much follows the same formula as the first page, in that you're using very similar shapes, the same rhythm and the same finger picking pattern. The only part we'll really need to look at is the last two bars with the G major chord. Before we take a look at those last two bars, I'll just play through the whole of the second page so you can get an idea how it should look and sound. As you can see, you use very similar shapes and the same style of play as the first page. However, this does jump around a lot between the frets, so this will take a little bit of practice to get right. Now let's look at the last two bars, because whilst they are simple, they're different. And that's because we play a traditional open G chord. To play the first three notes of the bar, which are blocked, we'll use the same finger picking fingers we've used throughout the tune, the primary, index and middle. And then we'll use the primary finger to play the other bass notes. However, I wouldn't recommend fingering the whole of the G chord at the beginning of the bar, because it'll slow you down and break the flow. I'd play the third fret on the top E string straight away, and introduce the second fret on the A string and the third fret on the bottom E string as you need them. Here's what those two bars look and sound like. And here that is again with a 2-bar introduction, in case you want to try and play along with it. Here's the whole of the second page being played with a 2-bar introduction at 100 beats per minute, in case you want to try and play along. But again, if you have to pause the video or go away and practice and come back another day, don't worry, that is quite normal. And here that is again at the same speed one last time. Right, let's see if we can bring together the whole tune at that nice slow 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction, and we'll ignore the repeats and play straight through. And here that is again, one last time at the same speed with a 2-bar introduction. And here's the tune again at 120 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction, playing right the way through without repeats. Before finishing up this lesson, I briefly need to explain the muting techniques, and there's many of them. The most common in this particular tune would be to place your picking finger back on the string. Another technique I used in the last bar there was to use the palm or the side of the hand to mute the strings. Another technique you don't really use in this particular tune, but is really handy to know, is just to lift the finger slightly to allow the string to stop ringing. Obviously, this technique doesn't work with open strings, but you can still use the fingering hand to mute the strings by just tapping very lightly on the string or strings you want to mute. And that's it. All that's left to do now is for you to go away and practice the tune and try and get it as smooth and flowing as you possibly can. Thank you very much for watching, and if you're new to the channel, please like, subscribe and hit the bell icon, and then you'll be notified when I upload new lessons. Also, you'll help the channel keep going. And if you want the tablature for this tune and the entire course, you can get it completely free at www.ebooks4guitar.com. Thanks again for watching.